It was a quiet night in a small town of Willow Creek. The streets were empty, and most people were asleep. The only sound was the soft hum of streetlights and the occasional bark of a dog. Everything seemed peaceful, until a strange call came into the 911 emergency center. The operator, Lisa Grant, had just taken a sip of her coffee when the phone rang. 911, what's your emergency? She said in her usual calm voice. At first, there was only silence. Then came a soft whisper, trembling, broken. Please, help me, said a woman's voice. Lisa sat up straight. Ma'am, what's happening? Are you hurt? There was no answer for a few seconds, only heavy breathing. Then the woman spoke again. They are here. I can't move. Please send someone. Suddenly, the line went dead. Lisa tried calling back, but no one answered. She quickly traced the call location. It came from an old house at the edge of town, a place most locals avoided. The system showed the address, 47 Hollow Street. Lisa immediately contacted the police. Officer David Miller and his partner Sarah Cooper were the first to respond. They knew the area well. It was a quiet neighborhood, but that particular house had a dark reputation. People said strange noises came from it at night. No one had lived there for years. At least, that's what everyone thought. When David and Sarah reached the house, the air felt cold and still. The wind blew through the tall, uncut grass. The old wooden gate creaked as David pushed it open. This place gives me the creeps, Sarah whispered, shining her flashlight toward the broken windows. They walked up to the front door. It was slightly open. Police department, David called out. Is anyone here? We received a call for help. No answer. Only silence. They stepped inside slowly. The floorboards cracked under their boots. The smell inside was strong, a mix of dust, damp wood, and something else. Something metallic. David looked around. The living room was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. A clock on the wall had stopped at 2:17. In the corner, a small TV flickered, though the power should have been off. Sarah noticed something on the floor, a trail of what looked like dried blood, leading down a dark hallway. Her heart raced. David, we need backup. He nodded, but before he could speak, they heard a sound. A faint thud, then another. It came from the basement. Both officers moved quietly toward the sound. Sarah opened the basement door. A cold draft hit her face. The stairs were narrow, leading into darkness. Police! David shouted again. If anyone's down there, make yourself known. No reply. Only the creak of the old house settling. They started walking down the stairs, flashlights cutting through the darkness. As they reached the bottom, they saw something strange. A light bulb swinging slowly as if someone had just touched it. And then they heard it. A soft sob. A woman's voice. The same one from the 911 call. Please, don't let him find me, she whispered from behind an old shelf. David and Sarah exchanged a look. Before they could move closer, a door slammed shut behind them. Bang! They turned around instantly, guns drawn. The sound echoed through the basement. The woman's crying stopped. Something moved in the shadows. David pointed his flashlight, and what they saw made their blood run cold. It wasn't just one person hiding there. There were 3 figures, standing silently in the dark, and none of them seemed alive. David's flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. The beam cut across the dark basement, landing on the 3 figures. For a few seconds he thought they were people, standing still, watching. But as he stepped closer, his heart pounded harder. They weren't alive. They were mannequins. Life-sized, human-shaped mannequins, each one dressed in old, torn clothes. One had a wig of tangled hair, another had red paint smeared across its face like blood. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "What is this place?" she whispered. Before David could answer, they heard the faint sound of someone breathing. It wasn't coming from the mannequins. It was coming from behind them. David spun around. "Show yourself!" he shouted. A dim light flickered from a small room at the far end of the basement. The door was slightly open. Inside, they could see the shadow of someone sitting on the floor. Sarah slowly pushed the door open. A young woman sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, trembling. Her hair was messy, her hands tied with rope. She looked terrified. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, lowering her gun. "We're police officers. You're safe now." The woman looked up, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "He's still here," Sarah frowned. "Who's here? Who did this to you?" The woman's voice shook as she answered. "The man who owns this house, he doesn't like visitors." Before Sarah could say anything, David's radio crackled. "Unit 12, what's your status?" the dispatcher asked. He pressed the button. "We've found a victim. She's alive but injured. We need medical assistance at 47 Hollow Street." The radio cut off mid-sentence. Static filled the air. Then a faint voice came through. Low, distorted. "You shouldn't have come here." David froze. That wasn't dispatch. Someone was listening. Someone was talking back. The woman began to cry again. "He's watching us," she said. "He always watches." Sarah scanned the room. There was an old security camera in the corner, the red light blinking. It was still working. David pointed his flashlight at it. "We need to move," he said. Now! They helped the woman to her feet. She was weak, limping, but she tried to walk. As they reached the basement stairs, something heavy fell behind them. A loud crash. David turned, flashlight sweeping across the room. One of the mannequins had fallen over. But he could have sworn it was standing far from the edge. "Keep moving," he ordered. They climbed the stairs. The air grew warmer, but the feeling of being watched never faded. When they reached the main floor, Sarah noticed the front door was now closed. "I didn't close that," David said quietly. He reached for the doorknob. It was locked. Before they could try again, all the lights in the house flickered and went out. The house fell into darkness. The woman screamed. "He's here! Please, don't let him take me back!" David shined his flashlight around. Shadows moved along the walls, quick and silent. Sarah pulled out her gun again, scanning every corner. Then came the sound. Slow, heavy footsteps from upstairs. Thump, thump, thump. "Stay here," David said, moving toward the staircase. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We should wait for backup." But David shook his head. "If someone else is up there, I need to know who." He climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight steady, gun ready. Each step creaked under his boots. When he reached the top, he saw a hallway lined with old family photos. Dust covered everything, except one frame that looked recently touched. It showed a man, smiling, standing beside a woman who looked exactly like the one they just rescued. David's stomach turned. The woman downstairs wasn't a random victim. She was part of this house. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hallway opened by itself. A dim light flickered from inside. David aimed his gun. "Police, show yourself!" No response. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. The smell of decay filled the air. The room was small, like an old child's bedroom. Toys were scattered everywhere. On the bed lay another mannequin. This one dressed like a child, its eyes painted open. David lowered his flashlight. On the wall above the bed, someone had written in dark red letters, "Welcome home." And just then, behind him, a man's whisper broke the silence. "You finally found me." David froze. The whisper was close, too close. He turned quickly, his flashlight shaking as the beam moved across the dark hallway. No one was there, but the voice had been right behind him. He took a slow breath and aimed his light toward the end of the hall. The door he had entered from was now half shut, creaking softly. "Sarah!" he called out. "Someone's up here." Downstairs, Sarah heard him and raised her gun. "Stay here," she told the frightened woman who was now sitting on the floor near the stairs. The woman kept whispering something again and again. "He doesn't like lights. He doesn't like lights." Sarah moved toward the stairs, flashlight ready. "David, talk to me." There was no reply. Only silence and the soft hum of electricity somewhere behind the walls. David slowly walked back toward the hallway. His boots made faint sounds on the wooden floor. Then, a sudden knock. Once. Twice. It came from the child's bedroom door. He aimed his gun again. "This is the police. Come out with your hands where I can see them." Still nothing. He stepped forward and pushed the door open fully. The room was cold. The mannequin on the bed still lay there, its glass eyes reflecting the light. But something had changed. The writing on the wall was no longer just, "Welcome home." Now it said, "You never left." David blinked. That wasn't there before. He stepped back, confused and tense. Then his radio crackled again. A deep voice came through. "You shouldn't have come here, Officer Miller." David froze. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Identify yourself." The voice laughed softly. "You're in my house now." Before he could respond, the flashlight flickered and went out. The room fell into total darkness. Downstairs, Sarah heard a loud bang. "David!" she shouted. She ran up the stairs, gun ready. The woman downstairs screamed again, covering her ears. Sarah reached the hallway, breathing hard. Her flashlight beam moved quickly from wall to wall until she found David, standing still, facing the window. "David, what happened?" she asked. He didn't move. "David?" She stepped closer and touched his shoulder. Slowly, he turned around. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, but his voice was calm, strange, almost empty. "He's here," David said softly. He said, "He wants us to stay." Sarah stepped back, her heart racing. "David, we're leaving. Right now." But as she turned toward the stairs, the hallway light suddenly came on. The entire corridor glowed yellow, and every door along the hall began to open by itself, creaking one after another. From each room, mannequins stood in rows, facing the hallway. Dozens of them, men, women, children, all dressed like real people, some with wigs, others with faces painted white. Sarah's hand shook as she pointed her gun. "This isn't possible." The sound of footsteps echoed from behind the mannequins. A tall man stepped out of the last room, wearing a dark coat and gloves. His face was hidden in shadow. "Who are you?" Sarah shouted. The man tilted his head slowly. "You got my message," he said. "The woman called for help, didn't she?" "She always does," Sarah frowned. "What are you talking about?" He smiled faintly. "She's been calling for years. But no one ever makes it out." Before Sarah could react, David suddenly moved in front of her, blocking her aim. His eyes looked strange, distant, almost hypnotized. "David, move," she ordered, but he didn't. He just whispered, "He's right. We can't leave." The man stepped closer. The mannequin seemed to shift slightly as if watching. "This house likes to keep its guests," he said softly. "It's hungry." Sarah fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the hallway. When the smoke cleared, the man was gone, vanished into thin air. David dropped to his knees, shaking. "He's inside the walls," he said. "He moves through them." Sarah grabbed him by the arm. "We're getting out, now!" They ran down the stairs, pulling the terrified woman with them. But when they reached the front door, it wasn't there anymore. The door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of old, cracked wood. The woman screamed. Sarah banged on the wall, desperate. "Where's the door?" David turned toward her, breathing fast. "He doesn't let anyone go. He wants a family," and as they turned around, every mannequin from the upstairs hallway was now standing behind them, lined up silently in the living room. Their painted faces smiled in the dark. The mannequins stood in perfect silence. Their blank faces seemed to watch every move. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled of old dust and decay. Sarah's heart pounded as she aimed her gun toward them. "Stay back!" she shouted, though she knew they couldn't hear her. The woman they rescued was crying softly, shaking her head. "It's too late," she whispered. "He won't let us go now." David looked around the living room, breathing hard. His flashlight beam moved across the walls, old wallpaper peeling, family portraits hanging crooked. One photo caught his eye. It showed the same man in the dark coat, standing in front of the house. But something was wrong. Beside him stood David himself. David froze. What is this?" he murmured. Sarah turned to look. Her blood ran cold. "That's not possible. That photo looks 50 years old." The woman crawled backward away from the picture. "He plays with time," she said in a trembling voice. "Once you enter his house, it remembers you. It keeps your soul here, forever." Sarah grabbed the woman's arm. "Who is he? Tell me." The woman looked up, her eyes glassy with fear. "He called himself the Collector. He said he saves people who are lost, but he doesn't save them. He keeps them." A sudden noise made them all jump, a soft hum like electricity. The lights flickered again. Every mannequin's head turned slightly toward the sound. David aimed his flashlight toward the hallway. "It's coming from there," he said. They followed the faint humming to the back of the house. There, hidden behind a torn curtain, was a metal door, old and rusted. It didn't belong in a normal house. David tried to open it, but it was locked tight. "We need something to break this," he said. Sarah looked around and found a broken chair leg. She jammed it into the lock and pushed hard until the metal creaked open. Inside was a narrow passage filled with flickering lights. The walls were lined with shelves, dozens of glass jars, each one holding something inside: hair, jewelry, buttons, pieces of old photographs. Sarah stepped closer, horrified. "Oh my God, these are from people." David swallowed hard. "Victims," he said quietly. "He's been keeping souvenirs." At the far end of the passage, they saw a wooden door slightly open. A faint light came through the crack. The sound of humming was louder now, mixed with something else. Soft, whispering. They approached slowly. When David pushed the door open, they entered a large underground room. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, missing person reports, crime headlines, and strange drawings. In the center of the room stood an old television, still working. The screen showed static, but sometimes for a second a face appeared, screaming silently. The woman fell to her knees. "That's where he traps them," she said. "In his memories. He shows them over and over." David's radio crackled again. A faint voice came through. "Officer Miller, respond." But it wasn't dispatch. It was his own voice. He dropped the radio, terrified. That's me." The screen flickered again. This time, they saw a live image, the three of them standing in the same room. Sarah stepped closer to the screen, confused. "It's showing us right now." Then the camera on the TV moved, panning slowly behind them. Sarah spun around, gun raised. A tall figure stood at the doorway. The Collector. His face was pale, thin, eyes hollow like a mask. He didn't move fast. He simply watched. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah yelled. The Collector smiled faintly. "They called for help. I gave them peace." "Peace?" David shouted. "You killed them." The man shook his head. "No, I kept them here, safe. The world outside forgets." "I don't." As he spoke, the mannequins began moving into the room, step by step, surrounding them. The woman screamed. "He's taking us next." Sarah fired a shot at the Collector. The bullet passed right through him, hitting the wall. He didn't bleed. He didn't even flinch. His voice echoed softly. "You're already part of the house now." Suddenly, the lights went out. Total darkness. Sarah could hear David calling her name, then the sound of glass breaking, footsteps, and finally, silence. When the lights came back on, Sarah was alone. The mannequins were gone. David was gone. The woman was gone. Only one thing remained. A new photo on the wall. It showed Sarah, David, and the woman standing in the basement, smiling. The ink under the photo read, "New Arrivals, October the 29th, 2025. Sarah stood frozen in front of the photograph. Her own smiling face stared back at her from the frame. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She touched the glass. It was cold, like ice. "This can't be real," she whispered. "This was never taken." Behind her, the lights flickered again. The house seemed to breathe, walls groaning softly as if alive. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on her chest. "David," she called out softly, hoping for an answer. Nothing. Only silence and the faint ticking of an unseen clock. Then she heard a whisper, the same voice as before. "You shouldn't be here, Sarah." She turned quickly, gun raised. The collector stood at the other end of the room. His pale face was partly hidden under his hat, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Where are they?" Sarah demanded. "What did you do to them?" The collector tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "They're safe now. I keep everyone who comes here. You're not the first, Officer Cooper." Sarah tightened her grip on the gun. "I'm not staying. You can't stop me." He took a slow step forward, his voice calm and cold. "You think you came here tonight because of a call, don't you? The woman who needed help? That call wasn't real. It was the house calling you." Sarah blinked. "What do you mean?" "The house chooses," he said softly. "It remembers pain, fear, and guilt. You have all three." She shook her head. "You're lying." The collector smiled faintly. "Do you remember 3 years ago? The warehouse fire?" Sarah froze. Her breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "You were the first to arrive that night," he continued. "You tried to save the people inside, but you failed. You left someone behind, didn't you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I tried. I couldn't get to them in time." The collector stepped closer, his voice turning almost gentle. "And ever since you've carried that guilt. That's why the house called for you. It feeds on guilt." Sarah's hands trembled. The memory came flooding back. The screams, the smoke, the one person she couldn't save. "No," she whispered. "I'm not dying here." The collector stopped just a few feet away. "You already did," he said quietly. Before she could react, the room around her began to change. The furniture melted into shadows. The floorboards turned into black water reflecting her face. The photo frames on the walls showed her, standing in every corner of the house. She stumbled backward, falling to her knees. "This isn't real," the collector's voice echoed, calm and endless. "It's as real as your guilt." Every soul here said the same thing. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice, David's. "Sarah!" She turned around. He was standing near the basement door, pale but alive. "We have to go," he shouted. Without thinking, she ran toward him. The collector didn't move, only watching silently as they opened the door and rushed down into the basement. The stairs groaned under their weight. The smell of rot and earth filled the air again. Sarah looked around. The mannequins were gone. The shelves were empty. "This way," David said, pointing to a small door at the back. "It leads outside." They pushed through, stumbling into a narrow tunnel. A faint light appeared ahead. Moonlight. They ran faster. As they reached the end, Sarah felt a hand grab her wrist. She turned. It was the woman they had rescued earlier. Her face looked calm now. Too calm. "Where are you going?" the woman asked softly. Sarah pulled away. "We're getting out." The woman smiled faintly. "No one leaves the house, officer. You should know that by now." Her eyes turned black. David shouted, "Sarah, run!" They burst through the end of the tunnel and found themselves back in the living room. Everything was the same. The photographs, the furniture, the smell. David looked around in horror. "We never left," he said quietly. The collector stood by the fireplace watching them. "You can run all you want," he said, his voice echoing. "But every path leads home." Behind him, a new picture hung on the wall. It showed Sarah and David standing side by side, eyes blank, faces smiling. Under it, in faded red ink, were 2 new words. "Final guests, to be continued in Part 6, the final truth." The room was silent. Too silent. Sarah stared at the new photograph on the wall. Her smiling face looked back at her again. Lifeless, still, wrong. Her chest felt tight, like the air had turned solid. David stood beside her, pale and shaking. "This can't be happening," he whispered. "We're still alive. We have to be." The collector stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. The firelight flickered, making his face appear older, like it was changing shape every second. "You're here because the house remembers you," he said softly. "It remembers everyone who carries guilt. It calls them home." Sarah raised her gun one last time, her voice trembling. "I'm not staying here. I'm ending this." The collector smiled. "You can't destroy what you already are." Before she could respond, the lights flickered and went out again. Darkness swallowed the room. Then came the whispering. Dozens of voices, circling them from every direction. Some cried, some laughed. Some begged for help. David grabbed her arm. "We have to find a way out." They stumbled through the dark, using the small light from David's phone. The hallway stretched longer than before, twisting in strange directions. The wallpaper peeled off, showing black wood underneath. The air smelled of smoke. Faint, but familiar. Sarah stopped suddenly. "Do you smell that?" David nodded. Smoke. A flash of memory hit her. The warehouse fire. The screams. The flames. The moment she lost someone inside. Her heart sank. "No, this can't be real." The collector's voice echoed around them, low and calm. "You never left the fire, Sarah. You've been running from it ever since." The hallway walls burst into flame. Fire roared around them. Sarah covered her mouth, coughing. David pulled her toward a door at the end of the corridor. They crashed through it and fell into a small room, dark, smoky, filled with ash. When Sarah looked up, she froze. She was back in the burning warehouse. The same walls, the same smell, the same screams. But this time she wasn't in uniform. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn that night. "No," she whispered. "This isn't real." David looked confused. "Sarah, what is this?" Her eyes filled with tears. "This is where it all started. I tried to save a man inside, but the building collapsed. He didn't make it. His name was Thomas." David frowned. "Thomas who?" a deep voice answered from behind them. "Thomas Grant." They turned. The collector stood in the smoke, his pale face now clear, his eyes human. Sarah gasped. Lisa Grant, the 911 operator. She had the same last name. He nodded slowly. "She's my sister. You promised her you'd bring me out alive that night, but you didn't." Sarah fell to her knees. "I tried. I swear I tried." "I know," he said softly, "but the house doesn't care about truth. It only feeds on regret. That's why I built it, to keep the guilty close, to make them remember." David shook his head. "You're insane." Thomas, the collector, smiled faintly. "Maybe. But every soul here is one that tried to forget. You can't escape your past, Officer Cooper. You live here now, like the rest." The fire around them grew brighter. Sarah stood up, tears mixing with ash. "Then I'll burn it all down. If this house feeds on guilt, I'll starve it." She pointed her gun at the old gas pipe running along the wall. "Goodbye, Thomas." Thomas looked almost peaceful. "Welcome home." She fired. The explosion shook the entire house. Fire tore through every wall, every shadow, every mannequin. The screams of trapped souls filled the air, then vanished into silence. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ashes and broken wood. Hours later, firefighters found the ruins of 47 Hollow Street. No bodies, no survivors. But on one of the surviving walls, there was a single photograph, unburned. It showed a woman in a police uniform, smiling faintly, standing beside a man in a dark coat. Underneath, written in red ink, were the final words, "Peace found. Sarah Cooper, 2025. The end. 911 call for help leads cops to House of Horrors."